Good afternoon from India, and good evening and good morning and wishes from people around the world who are watching this. We are entering into the fourth thematic session of this conference on the theme Idea of the University During and Beyond COVID-19 Disruption. I have great pleasure in welcoming and introducing very briefly our distinguished panelists. We have with us Professor Dr. Shalini Bharat, Director of the TATA Institute of Social Sciences in India, Professor Dr. VAHAN AGOPYAN, the Rector of the University of São Paulo, Brazil. We have Professor Dr. HASSAN, AL-DERHAM, President of the Qatar University, Qatar. And we have Professor Dr. Hans Zebit, Director of the Center for International Higher Education, Boston College, United States of America. We have with us our very distinguished collaborator and friend, Dr. Francisco MARMOLEJO, Education Advisor, Office of the Chairperson, Qatar Foundation, Qatar. Thank you very much to all of you for joining us, and over to Francisco for moderating the session.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kumar. It's a real pleasure moderating today's session with a distinguished set of panelists. During this conference in which Qatar Foundation is very pleased to be part of the co-conveners, we have been able to listen to different perspectives on the significant challenges that higher education is facing in the world. But rather than going back to the same discussion about the significant challenges, I'd like during this session, hopefully the panelists may help us to guide us based on their perspective, just to collectively think about the future of the university. You know, how this significant disruption that higher education has been facing in the world is providing us with a unique opportunity to redesign, to redevelop, to rebuild, if you want, higher education. And in which way higher education institutions will have to adapt faster than expected in order to properly address the new realities. So that's the whole idea of today's session, for which I'm extremely pleased to be participating with a very well-distinguished group of panelists that I'd like to briefly introduce to you. So we will have in today's session Professor VAHAN AGOPYAN, which is the Rector, the President of the University of Sao Paulo, which, as you I'm sure know, is one of the most important universities in Latin America. Also Professor SHALINI, which is the Director of another very important institution in India, which specializes precisely on the social sciences, which is the TATA Institute of Social Sciences in Mumbai. Also, I'm very pleased to have in the panel Professor Hassan AL-DERHAM, which is the president of the Land Grant University in Qatar, which is Qatar University, a comprehensive research-oriented university, also a very important institution. And last but not least, I'd like to introduce a good friend as well, Professor Hans Zebit, which is the director of the Center for International Higher Education at Boston College, and probably one of the most well-known specialists on international education globally. So the idea is for all of you panelists to help us to think about that. So in order to do that, I'd like to start by asking Professor AGOPYAN from Brazil, what you can tell us a little bit about the fact that, of course, the present pandemic has laid bare in front of us several significant assumptions about how different institutions operate and who is being benefited from or left by them. In the context of higher education, due to the pandemic, what has been revealed about the university as an institution? What is working well and what is not? What needs to be repaired in your opinion, and what it is broken beyond repair? So can you please give us your brief perspective on that?
Hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure for me to be here with you. I'm thank you very much for this invitation. It's very important for us to share experience, to share expertise, that how we can cope with this pandemic situation. Just give you a short explanation about University of São Paulo. Maybe not it's not very well known in India. University of São Paulo is a very large, comprehensive research institution. We have about 60 undergrad students, almost 30,000 research graduate students, 6,000 faculties, and 14,000 non-academic staff. And we cover all of the subjects from A to Z, let's say from agriculture to the zoology. And so we are a very comprehensive, very multidisciplinary institution, and we are in the state of São Paulo. We are a state university. We belong to the state of São Paulo. Well, the question is a very, very important question. I try to answer very quickly. For instance, for the teaching, we managed to keep more than 90% of the lectures in virtual conditions. And of course, we have to provide some support for our students. And the next semester, which is going to start next Monday, will be virtually again, without the students attending the lecture at the campuses. But as you know, we are a research university. For us, it's very important to have the education to teach in a research environment. With this situation, we are not in a good mood. So we are not being able to give this opportunity to our students to, let's say, to have the classes, to have the education in a special environment. However, we decided to keep this situation in order to be sure that this will not be a lost year. So the students are not going to spend another further year at the university. So this was our major task. Regarding the research, of course, I'm very pleased to tell everyone that in 2 or 3 weeks, we managed to have more than 200 research groups, actually almost 250 research groups, diverting or starting research projects relating to COVID-19. They are multidisciplinary groups from all areas of knowledge, not restricted to the health sectors. And moreover, they managed to provide the society with proper results. So we are getting the result already. The behavior of our researchers changed, and now they understood that good research, let's say, good research work could be translated to the society immediately.
I see.
So that is my main important point. But of course, let's say it's not been possible for let's say for security reasons to allow all of our graduate students to be in the labs. So we restrict their actions. Once again, they are postponing their activities. They are not being able. Some of them will not be able to finish their doctoral degree or master degree on time.
That's
but
cool.
that's the point. Let's see. We are doing our best, and the main point is really not to frustrate our students and make them possible to do the research and have their classes virtually.
Excellent. Very good. Thank you very much. I'd like to ask the other panelists, if just in a very few words, if you can tell us what it is working and what is broken and needs to be repaired in higher education in general. You know, in addition to the points that Dr. Vahan mentioned about the way that university, particularly the case of USP, has adopted. But can you please tell us just in a few words, Dr. Shalini, Dr. Hassan, or Dr. Zebit, what will be the word that you will say, this is not working, this needs to be repaired? Shalini?
Yeah. So thank you again from my side also for involving me in this very interesting conference and for giving this opportunity. I think the abruptness and the suddenness with which universities had to lock down and stay off campus and ask students to go away, what has really worked is that digital platforms have come to our to our aid, and we could minimize the disruption to the academic calendar in a very effective way. What has really not worked is the fact that students, we are missing the physical interaction with students. Students are not able to learn peer-to-peer. Students are not able to get guided in a physical mode, especially for universities like ours, which are a social science university, as you said in my introduction, where experiential learning is so important. To be in communities, to be working with people is so important. I think that's something which is not working at the moment.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Dr. Hassan from Qatar University. What is working, what is not working, briefly?
Exactly, I was going to say the same that mentioned by my colleague Shalini. I think the technology platforms helped us a lot in overcoming the challenges that we have faced with this pandemic. I think this is the first time since the Second World War that the whole global world locked down for the same time for the same reason. However, technology has helped humanity to overcome in many of these challenging situations. I'm talking about those countries and universities who had the resources to overcome such issues using these platforms. Of course, some other universities which has less resources would face also more challenges in this respect. I'm not sure how they have dealt with this situation.
I see.
On the other hand, I also second what Professor Shalini mentioned, about the interaction between the students and the faculty. We have not, been in a situation that get used to such a situation. I think the learning curve is getting better and better. However, still the interaction between the peers, between the students themselves, the skills that they learn from each other is missing. Yeah. And this social connectivity, which is the human part, is missing, although it has been compensated with the WhatsApp and the other click ways of communicating. However, I think it is the fourth industrial generation challenging, where put on the educators and higher educators the challenge to face these new circumstances. I think the coming decade is for the social scientists to deal with these new situations.
That's correct. It demonstrates that the pandemic is not only a problem of health, it requires many solutions beyond the traditional perspective on just health. Very good. Thank you. Hans, what do you think? What works? What it is broken?
What works is that, sorry.
Yeah,
what works
we can hear you
now is what works, I think, was the adaptability of the universities and other institutions of higher education to respond to the crisis by developing the platforms. What is not working well is to do it in a quality way. So to create a kind of more hybrid model of online and on-site education. The big danger that we see is that after the vaccine has been found and the crisis is over, that university leaders will go back to the old system. And we have to take it as an opportunity to change the system fundamentally. In relation to that, not so much the technology, I think what has become very clear is that we have becoming too much privatized. And the role of the university as a public institution has to be reinforced, because we have becoming too dependent on international student fees, on endowments, and they all now are vamping away. And that is a danger for the universities and the higher education sector in general. So we have to depend much more on the public support for higher education for the future. Otherwise, we will be in danger.
Very interesting. And I appreciate you mentioned that, Hans, because that connects to the question that I have for Dr. Shalini Bharat. The traditional idea of the university was, that university which is selective, which is highly focused on research, that of course benefits a few and unfortunately doesn't provide the opportunity to all. which is related to what Hans was making a point about the issue of inequality of opportunities in higher education. At the same time, higher education institutions have significant pressures. You know, for instance, they have the pressure to enroll larger number of students. They have the pressure, faculty members, they have the pressure of publish or perish. There is, of course, a significant pressure for higher education institutions in terms of the way that research needs to be connected also to productivity in a way. So my question for you, Dr. Shalini, is, can we expect any change in this once the university reopens? Or, you know, we will continue the same trends. It will be the same as it used to be, business as usual, I might say. What is your perspective on this, Shalini?
I would think that, you know, although we have spent about 4 months now in the lockdown and, you know, universities are shut, even then, this is a very small opportunity for us to redesign universities in a majorly, you know, different way. So I'm not looking at many things changing, like publish or perish, you know, and the, you know, greater enrollment of students. However, what might work and what will probably change is the acceptance that, you know, we have to have access to digital technology in a much larger way to, you know, bridge the gap, the digital gap. And there is a much larger acceptance that we may have to go on a blended mode, a hybrid mode. And that acceptance, which was resisted, I think, by many universities for a very long time, will certainly disappear. Because we have at least, you know, in most parts of the universities, I think we have tested that this is working. And working from home also is in a way working, and in many ways also making us efficient. We are not losing, we are not missing many, you know, meetings. And in fact, we are attending most meetings, and a large number of people we are reaching out. So I think there is a much greater acceptance. And even among university faculty, where there was a bit of a resistance and apprehension that is this a good enough, for, you know, platform for teaching, it certainly has given them experience and a way of testing. However, the realization that universities are in unequal, you know, systems, a whole lot of students are falling by the wayside, is something that we have to work. I think that is something which universities will take time to analyze and come back with bigger solutions and better solutions. I think that's definitely change.
Interesting. I'd like to hear the reaction from the other panelists on this as well. Do you think that, you know, for instance, this opportunity, as the director of the TATA Institute of Social Sciences indicates, will give us the opportunity to expand access to higher education by using, you know, technological means, as the reality is proven that is working right now? And also the question is if the publication, you know, a pressure for researchers is going to change or not. So can you briefly, very briefly, just react to those two related questions? VAHAN?
Okay, it's a very good question. And I think it's something even more broadly. We have to analyze more broadly because, you know, during the last year, we are very much concerned about the third mission of the university. And now with this crisis, university is closer to the society. And certainly, we are going to change all of these points you mentioned, because now we are working with the society. Let's say every day the faculties are in the media discussing the topics. So now we have another approach, another link, and probably, and I hope that it will be possible, probably the new normal will be better normal.
Excellent.
So what you mentioned in a broad way will be changed.
I appreciate your.
It has to change.
I appreciate your optimism. I hope also others may agree with that. Dr. Hassan from Qatar University, what is your opinion on those two things?
I also agree with what have been said. You know, I think it is an opportunity for the universities and higher educators to engage the students with any new challenges. You know, for us here in Qatar, at Qatar University, Qatar University, was selected to become the volunteer center, the national volunteer center for the national efforts for fighting the COVID-19, pandemic. With the available human resources we have, we have utilized our students. They were very motivated to be engaged and to help and support the government efforts towards, fighting this pandemic. So I think it is important for the universities to grasp the opportunities and to flip the challenges into opportunities in this case.
Interesting. Very good. Yes, and I should mention that I have been witnessing this very interesting social service commitment that the community is having in Qatar, and that is, of course, channeled through, in this case, the Qatar University. Also at Qatar Foundation, a similar effort has been done. Hans, what do you think? Is that pattern going to change or not?
Well, I think it has to change. Let me put it that way. It doesn't go automatically. We have really to make that change happen, because there will be, as I said, the automatic response to go back to normal before and forget about the crisis. But there is clearly a need now to change that was already there before the crisis, but has to become now much more manifest, because we are facing so many problems. We are facing the Sustainable Development Goal challenges. We're facing racism and inequality in higher education. We are facing an enormous economic and social crisis. We have geopolitical tensions around the world that are affecting us. And higher education has to play an important role in trying to answer to all those challenges that are. And if we don't do that, then we do something wrong. And we should not only do that as top research universities. One of the biggest problems we have faced in higher education, all the focus was on the top ranked 200 universities in the world. And if something has become clear, we need a much more differentiated system of post-secondary education. We need top research universities, absolutely. But not every higher education institution has to be a top research university. We also need very specialized schools. We need vocational higher education. Yeah. We need University of Applied Sciences. We need community colleges. We need liberal arts colleges. We need a very much more diversified system of higher education. And that has to be very much the political agenda for the future, to make it possible for people to access higher education, but also have a differentiated system of higher education.
Yeah. Which, if I may add, Hans, will require a more sort of conscious decision for policymakers, but also institutions, in recognizing the differential qualities, but the fact that that there is good quality as well. This is one of the reasons, by the way, that in my previous life working at the World Bank, always we were making the point about the need to talk about tertiary education rather than just higher education, because it is not just universities. But going back to the point that precisely you, Hans, were making, I'd like to ask the president of Qatar University. Before you were talking about the public versus private and the public value of higher education in the world. And of course, during the crisis, a good number of research-oriented universities have been focusing on providing solutions. The vaccination is probably the most visible example of that, but providing solutions in order to cope with the pandemic. But the question for Dr. Hassan is if, in your opinion, the pandemic has helped or not to highlight the significant and important stature of universities, and particularly if that is going to help to, I might say, reshape the dialogue between higher education and the rest of society or not?
Yes, I think as I mentioned earlier, it is obvious that with the fourth industrial revolution, which has put many challenges for the first time in front of higher education sector in general, with this pandemic, I think it has also shown that we live in an interconnected world. So it is very important for educators to educate citizens to be an interconnected world, citizen or a global citizen. So the pandemic illustrates that, how globally we are interconnected. So there is no longer such a thing that we are isolated, we have an isolated issues and actions. So successful people in the coming decades need to be able to understand this interrelatedness and negative across boundaries to leverage their differences and work in a globally collaborative way. A second thing, we have also in this regard to redefine the role of the educator, where the information or science or knowledge is available. It's only a click away from the students. So this means that the role of the educators will need to move towards facilitating the youngsters to become or to contribute member of the society, or so the educator has to be a facilitator in this case. Also, this pandemic shows that we have to be resilient to deal with any situation. We are entering into an uncertainty situations, with all of this interconnectivity between the countries. Uncertainty also become higher and higher day after day. So universities or have to be resilient to react fast, so that can also capture the opportunities towards teaching the students life skills, to be resilient, to be flexible, and entrepreneurial, to teach them entrepreneurial skills, issues related to how to socialize in a new situation. And of course, finally, is to unlock the technology to deliver education. We have seen that technology can help us in this regard, and of course we can utilize the technology in a much better way to reach more students, and whether they are in remote areas or they live in urban cities. We have to grab this and to move it into new situation. However, it comes also again with some other challenges, as I mentioned earlier, with respect to the social issues, how to deal with the issues such as, for example, where a student can probably fear of being alone, or fear of missing out from of being getting the right opportunity for high quality education.
Interesting. What is interesting is the fact that years ago there have been a lot of predictions about universities disappearing, universities getting out of business, and I think the pandemic is telling us that universities are more needed than ever. I think the big challenge for all of us is that we need to make a greater case with the rest of society on why it matters, higher education. The other interesting point, Dr. Hassan, you mentioned is that there are these soft skills that are very important for the graduates of the future, I might say the graduates of the present. But paradoxically, unfortunately, many universities don't teach for those skills. We assume that students will learn that by osmosis, I might say, and that we don't have a conscious effort in our higher education institutions in making sure that those skills are acquired by the students. So I appreciate that. Now, Hans, you as an expert on internationalization, you have been part of a significant debate globally about the sort of the capacity of adaptation that internationalization has or not to the new reality. Especially if we think about the fact that most of the internationalization is associated with the word mobility. And since mobility is not, anymore a reality, at least in the short term. And secondly, because mobility is just benefiting a few number of students. So we wonder if in this new reality, Hans, is there any chance to reinvent, I might say, internationalization in order to be more supportive of all students? And that connects to the, to the issue about the role of the university in the community, not only the local community, but also the global community. So I wonder if you can elaborate on that.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yes, I think one of the big opportunities there is now is that we can make the shift from internationalization being exclusively mobility for a very small elite to global learning for all. Because what we have seen over the past, as you have said, Francisco, is that worldwide, only something like 1 or 2% of the student population and even of the faculty had the opportunity to have an experience abroad. So we have been focusing in all our policies at the international level, at the national level, at the institutional level, focusing on a very small percentage of individuals who could have that opportunity. And I'm not going to say that that opportunity is bad. On the contrary, you would wish that everybody had that opportunity. I have been living in Peru as a student for a year, and it still has been very important for my personal experience. But we know it's not possible because there are not the means and the facilities to make that happen. So if we're not changing internationalization to global learning for all, we continue to do the elitist way of internationalization. How are we going to do that? Here, the COVID crisis has made more explicit the opportunity. We can use the technology. We can bring students and faculty together online by having collaborative online learning, not only in the passive sense that you are watching a lecture of a foreign professor on your laptop, but that students jointly from different parts of the world can study together, can do joint assignments together, can use LinkedIn and Twitter, etc., all the social media to work together and to get to know each other. That's an opportunity that we have now. We really have to make that shift so that indeed what our colleague from Qatar says, we are making students much more global citizens by being connected, not necessarily by the physical mobility. If it's possible, it's fine. But if we are using the opportunity, then it will be happening. Because, and that relates to the second point that Francisco asked me, we always have seen as universities our third mission as being service to society. So research and teaching were our two first roles, but service to society has been the other one. That mission, in many cases, in particular in the high income countries, has become much more service to the market and not to society. And we have to bring it back to service to society. How can we help to solve the issues in the local community and realize that those issues in the local community, health, poverty, climate, are global issues. So that we can say, well, if we want to solve the local issues, we have to bring in the comparative perspective, what are other universities, what are other governments, what are other contexts doing. And if we want to solve the global issues, we have not to take it away from the local context. So bringing those issues together is very important.
Yeah, no, I think, and it's fundamental. We need to make sure that institutions become globally engaged, but locally responsible, I might say.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, and that goes to a question that I have for President of University of Sao Paulo. Despite all the criticism, the reality and the evidence shows that, higher education matters. It has a value, that both the economic and social benefits associated with higher education are evident. Those individuals and those countries who invest in higher education have the greater economic benefits, but also there are many more externalities in terms of more engaged citizens, healthier citizens, more tolerant individuals, etc., etc. So, you know, the empirical evidence shows that higher education, you know, has a value, and that also that is the best enabler of social and economic mobility of individuals in our societies. So, do you think that with this evidence, how do you think the expectations from university are going to be shaped after the pandemic crisis?
Well, let's say, Francisco, I am very glad that, at least in Brazil, the society now realize that the universities are part of the solution. So this is something very important for us. The society changed their mind. So now they rely on the work we are doing. They understand that we are a reliable source of information and that we really can make the difference to solve their problems. And the social point of view, as was mentioned in this discussion, is becoming very important. Now we cannot, let's say, separate what the society needs and what we're trying to do. So now we're getting closer. And I hope we manage to, let's say, to answer the challenges that the society is pointing out. And I think that the faculties are understanding that really this is the way to work together with society, and of course with the policymakers, because that's another point, that the policymakers they have some difficulties to understand exactly what is a university.
Yeah, and
let's say I'm optimistic, Francisco. You may say, but I am optimistic but realistic, because I feeling during the last 3-4 months the change that we are getting the relationship between university and society.
Interesting. I wonder if any of the other panelists also have any reaction to the same question. Would like to add to that? Otherwise, we continue with, I continue asking questions.
I'd like to say something, Francisco.
Please go ahead. Go ahead, Chen.
I think, you know, the pandemic has certainly put a spotlight on universities and what universities do, and that the universities do make a lot of, you know, new knowledge creation, and that knowledge creation is not just for, you know, putting in shelves and, you know, goes into publication. It has real value. And the pandemic has made it possible for us to show how universities can intervene and bring, you know, direct benefits to societies. And with that kind of a realization, I think it is also an important realization that governments perhaps are having around the world. At least I've seen it in some parts of the world, that they are also looking to universities as, you know, important partners in finding a solution. A lot of students and faculty are you know, doing a lot of interesting work in their lab, are creating, you know, small and I think cost-effective solutions, finding ways in which they bring, you know, technology closer to people who need them the most, patients, for example. And I think with that realization, it's going to be a very important, you know, role that governments will think that universities do have in finding solutions. And it's not just that, you know, STEM universities will have, but also social science research universities are also, you know, part of the solution. Otherwise, the focus is generally on, you know, what science and technology universities can do. In this pandemic, we have realized that there is so much to understand about the way in which people are taking this whole strategy of lockdown, of quarantine, of, you know, social distancing. What does it mean? And what does it mean for people living in very, very difficult situations? And unless you understand that, you cannot make people follow those, you know, norms and follow those guidelines. And I think it's been a, you know, very challenging time, but a very fruitful time as well for universities to contribute.
That's indeed the very, very important point. Is just beyond epidemiology. Is much more than that, right? So, Dr. Hassan or Dr. Hans, anything to add? Hans, I see that you raised your hand. Go ahead, Hans.
Yeah, although I agree, we also have to be worried because what we have seen after all the positive reactions about the role of research and universities and the community, etc., the reality is that, for instance, in Europe, the European Commission, when they had to do the budget, they cut it on research, they cut it on the Erasmus scheme. Australian universities are firing researchers. American universities are freezing hiring of researchers. Many developing countries will not be able to invest ongoing in the public sector, private sectors. Universities will be in danger. So let's not be too optimistic about the situation. We really have to fight for the importance that higher education and post-secondary education in general has for society. It's not going to be easy because the challenges are enormous, and if we don't make our points constantly about the importance of post-secondary education, we will lose the battle in this conflict for funding.
Yeah, and I might say that, you know, the reality is that higher education will be and is already competing with other significant priorities that governments have, you know, in health, in, you know, economic reactivation, etc. So it is not an easy task. And I agree that we need to make the point about the importance of, and that means having adequate evidence of that. So Dr. Hassan, any reaction to that?
You know, as for researchers, I think it is a long-term cycle in order to come up with the solutions. So it is important for us as higher educators, policymakers, to ask our researchers to come up with you know, proposals, research proposals that are more practical to the society, for coming up with solutions for short and medium answers for the challenges that we face, because governments and societies are during pandemic time, you know, they are not in a situation where they can wait for answers that can come after 10 or 15 years. They need answers, solutions now to deal with the current situation. So we need also to think more practical as you know, research institutions and universities. We have to ask our faculties, our researchers, our scientists to think more practically, to come up with more short answers, you know, to provide the society, so that, you know, policymakers or governments can really understand the added value of universities to our societies and communities.
Yeah, it's a significant task to be conducted. Professor Shalini, is academic freedom in jeopardy because of the pandemic?
In a way, I would say yes, because what we are finding is that, you know, the autonomy to make decisions and to move into, say, a situation of doing things what suits them is not there for many universities. And I don't see that improving or changing in, you know, a post-COVID world as well. In fact, I would think that, you know, wherever there was universities that, you know, have enjoyed certain autonomy have been able to move into, you know, the online teaching mode to, you know, to save their academic calendar. But where there is no autonomy of this kind of decision making, universities have been left in a limbo, in fact, creating a whole lot of anxiety and a whole lot of, you know, disturbance within the student body. And this student body is not a small one. It must be in, you know, in thousands and millions. And so post-COVID, the world will need to see that, you know, universities have to be given a whole lot of autonomy. In fact, what Hans said was, you know, a situation which might happen, that, you know, we may see a lot of financial cuts. So while I'm happy to say that universities are proving to be important, playing an important role in this pandemic, the situation which may pan out after this is one of, you know, facing a whole lot of financial cuts. That's
correct.
A situation that may stare all of us. That's true.
It's a reality. Many universities, unfortunately, are going to be facing very difficult situation, especially the ones which are highly dependent on public resources and or on tuition and fees of the students.
Okay.
And then going back to the point about academic freedom, I know, for instance, in the case of Brazil, recent discussions on that matter. So, so do you think academic freedom is in jeopardy, Vahan?
Let's say, Francisco, not really the academic freedom, but the narrowness of point of view of the policymakers, because from them to support apply research with a clear link to the improvement in daily lives is more important than the basic research. Let's say the distinction between science for a purpose, applied science, applied research, and science for discovery, fundamental science, maybe actively harming because of science writ large. In my point of view, this division is between fields is artificial. Nevertheless, in certain reinforcement of policymakers and general public, they tend to prefer the applied science. So this is my concern.
Very good. Excellent. Now, Professor Hassan, you already had mentioned before, related to the topic of the transition of the university, about the fact that technology-based education is becoming more normal. And again, Peter Drucker many years ago predicted that universities will disappear because they were not suited to the new reality. So do you think that in this after-pandemic world, the classroom and the university as a physical space is really finally going to evolve, or still we will be connecting university with the buildings and the classrooms?
Well, I think, for universities, the way that we teach, the way that we deliver our curricula, our study plans, the evaluation that we usually do for our students has to be again re-questioned with the new situation that we enter into it. As mentioned by my colleagues from University of Sao Paulo, our new normal, I think, will be a better normal if we have, taken this opportunity that we have, been facing, in terms, for example, of having a hybrid way of delivering knowledge. Not necessarily to have 100% on class teaching. However, it should be in a hybrid way. Let us not forget that knowledge is not only about classroom or what has been, or it's not about the skill and the skills that our students will gain. Will not get it only through the classroom. In fact, there are many skills that our students, we make sure that they get it through the extracurricular activities, through students union, through out of class, such as sports activities, social activities, student unions, and other way of for shaping their personalities. So I think if higher educators think that they can give the skills or deliver or shape the skills of the students 100% online, they will fail in doing so, because students have to communicate face to face with their faculty, with their teachers, with their peers, in order to gain and to reach and to shape their and to have a comprehensive way of dealing with things in the future.
Interesting. So, unfortunately, we are getting almost at the end of the session, but of course, there are a number of questions that have been raised by the audience. And So unfortunately, we cannot address all the questions, but a few if we have a chance. So one of them I like ask Hans to respond, but of course others also can contribute. Is a general question, but of course is the big question. You know, what will be the best way for universities to engage in global collaboration during and after the pandemic, and extend such collaboration beyond the pandemic to promote knowledge development? So how collaboration really is going to be effective in this new reality? Hans, and again, others can add to that.
Well, yeah, I think if one thing the pandemic has made very clear is that you have to collaborate to develop vaccines, to develop other ways of how to deal knowledge, to how to treat victims of the corona crisis, how to deal responses to technology in the higher education community. Everything means you cannot invent the solutions yourself. So you have to collaborate in research, you have to collaborate in joint knowledge development, you have to collaborate in global learning for your students. Everything makes clear that collaborative global research and teaching is a necessity. And we even see already signals. Times Higher Education had, I think yesterday, a very nice article about it, that although, for instance, there is all the efforts by the Trump administration and even the Chinese government to break the research relationships between scholars from those two countries, that there is increasing research between Chinese and American scholars. Because they know there's no other way than research collaboration. The difficulty, again, also shown in that article, is that developing countries are falling behind in that collaboration. And we have to be sure that if we create this kind of collaborative research and teaching, that it is inclusive, that it is inclusive of universities in the developing world, that we're not going back to the system that we had before, where only the top-ranked institutions of the world work together and making the rest exclusive of the development which is necessary, because the problems are global and we have to work globally together. So it's not something that's automatically going. We really have to put it high on the agenda, that only global collaborative universities and other sectors is the future for the world, and not only for the higher education sector.
Very good. Any other reaction from the panelists to this question? Professor Shalini?
Yeah, I'd like to say that just to add to what Hans is saying, that you know, we need to collaborate, not just because we are you know, looking at a pandemic which affects all of us, but also because you know, we need among students the skills to work in any part of the world today. Perhaps it's not just, you know, a local problem. So if there are students who are learning some skills in India, probably they may be able to work out with those same skills in the rest of the world as well. So I think collaboration is going to be key to surviving this pandemic, and universities will play a very important role only if we understand that, yes, in a globalized world, we cannot do away with collaboration to look at pandemics of this nature.
That's correct. Vahan or Hassan?
Well, I fully agree with my colleagues, because we have to fulfill the challenges that the society has. In order to fulfill these challenges, we have to be more collaborative among the universities. We have to change from competitiveness to collaboration. Definitely.
Yeah, very good. Dr. Hassan?
I totally agree. In fact, for us at Qatar University, we have so many things we have learned by collaborating with our colleague and, you know, partner universities, whether in China or in Italy, how they dealt with the pandemic situation as a university, how did they, you know, reopened again, how they are going to deal with the situation with their students and the faculty. So I think, you know, that was a model for us for, you know, learning from our partner universities in terms of policies. The same thing applies for research, and it applies for delivering our, you know, classes in the future.
You know, now that you mentioned that, I recall that there is someday I was reading that there is a big difference between cooperation and collaboration, because cooperation means operating together something but not changing, while collaboration is creating something together. And I think that's the significant shift that we need to achieve in our higher education global community. So we are almost finishing the session, but I cannot resist the temptation to ask each of the panelists this one single question. If you will be able to change something in higher education, let's say in your institution, or in your country, and the higher education system, if you will be able to change, I might say magically, something in higher education in order to be a better higher education for the realities of the after pandemic life, what you will change? So I will ask to start Dr. VAHAN from Rector of University of Sao Paulo. If you very briefly, we have only 4 minutes and all of us have to speak now. If you briefly could say, I will change this or that, please go ahead.
Well, it's a very, very easy question. I can answer in half an hour at least.
No.
Okay, let's say, Francisco, I think that the main point is really the teaching. Okay. The universities have to learn how to teach the students in the 21st century. Of course, we are already preparing, but now with the pandemics, we have to accelerate the changes.
Very good.
And I hope that the faculties and the students can join efforts and propose a new way of teaching in 21st century.
That reminds me of an expression that I read recently that says that, you know, the traditional lecture is the best way to teach, but the worst way to learn. So Dr. Shalini, what you will change in higher education?
I think what troubles most universities in our part of the world is to reach education to all in this online mode of teaching. So I would really want us to strive towards accessible, access to education for all. That last student living in the most remote corner of the country also should be able to access the wonderful lectures or whatever newness we bring into our teaching in the online mode. I think that would be something we would look forward to.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Shalini, Director of the TATA Institute of Social Sciences in India. Dr. Hassan AL-DERHAM, President of QATAR University. What, if you will have a chance, what you will change in higher education?
I think it is time for our educators to have a paradigm shift in the way that we teach. And I totally agree of my colleague the Professor VAHAN. The way that we teach is something that we need to rethink of it and to make sure that our faculty need to have this shift, paradigm shift of the way that they teach and the way that they evaluate the students.
Very good. Last but not least, Hans Zebit, Director of the Center for International Higher Education at Boston College. If you will have the magic wand, what you will change?
Well, I agree with my colleagues. I mean, making teaching inclusive is very essential. But I would even go further in the sense we have the whole sector much more inclusive. So we have to avoid that people are excluded from access to tertiary education. We have to make it possible that we collaborate between institutions from different contexts and not only working in the paradigm of the Western dominance of higher education and tertiary education. So we have to collaborate, as you say, and we can only do that when it is an inclusive collaboration.
Well, thank you very much, Hans, and thanks to all of you for this very engaging, stimulating, and very interesting conversation. Of course, at this point, it is very clear that there are much more questions than answers. And that probably if there are simple answers to the complexity of the problems that higher education is facing today, probably those answers will be wrong because the reality is so complex that, of course, complex solutions need to be sort of conceived. And if there is any hope for a better understanding of those solutions, is precisely where the talent of our societies is, which is higher education. Higher education is in need for change, and I'm sure that, as all of you have described, there are significant challenges, but at the same time, there are significant opportunities, and there is, of course, realism on one way, but also optimism on the other way. So it is just 1 hour since we began our conversation. I truly appreciate your comments and, of course, the patience of the audience. And then I will pass the floor to Professor Raj Kumar. Thanks to all of you.
Well, thank you very much, Francisco, for so ably chairing the session and keeping up the schedule. I really want to take this moment to thank Professor VAHAN AGOPYAN, Rector of the University of Sao Paulo, Professor Shalini BHARAT, the Director of TATA Institute of Sciences, Professor AL-DERHAM, President of the QATAR University, and of course, Professor Hans Zebit, Director of the Center for International Higher Education at Boston College. We couldn't have had a better set of reflections on the complexity of the challenges that are facing higher education. I deeply appreciate your candidness and also your effort to try to address some of those questions as well. It's also important for us to continue the discourse that we've had, and I believe we will be in touch with each one of you. I am grateful to you for taking the time out from your very busy schedule to be part of this conference and indeed this session. Thank you so much.